Hey y'all, today is January 12th and we're talking about how to write two-step equations. So here's our little mini lesson. Grab a pencil and piece of paper and let's get started. So number one, write an equation that represents the following description. 17 more than 5 times the number is negative 16. Well, let's talk about 5 times the number first. We don't know what that number is, so I'm going to use a variable. It can be any variable you want it to be, but I'm going to use x because that's very common. So 5 times x, I'm going to represent as 5x. Now I know I'm adding 17 more to that. So because it's 17 more than that, I'm going to add 17, so plus 17. And remember we talked about this word equals, or is, means equals. So equals, and it says negative 16, so negative 16. So there's my equation that represents this description. 5x plus 17 equals negative 16. Number two, at a graduation dinner, an equal number of guests was seated at each of 6 large tables, and 5 late arriving guests were seated at a smaller table. There were 77 guests in all. If n represents the number of people seated at each of the large tables, what equation could you use to find the value of n? Okay, lots of information here, but some important information is that there are 6 large tables. There were 5 late arriving guests, and they sat at a smaller table on their own. There were 77 guests in all. So the total number of people there was 77. And then it also tells me that n represents the number of people seated at each of the large tables. Now that's important because I also know that there are 6 large tables. So 6 large tables, and n represents the number of people at each of those tables means I'm going to multiply 6 and n together. So when I look at my answer choices here, I can eliminate A and B because they don't have 6 and n multiplied together. So I'm just looking at one of these two to be correct. So I need to know if I need to subtract 5 or add 5. Well, those 5 guests that came late, yeah, they sat at their own table, but they're included in the 77 guest count. So I want to add them to the guest count. So that means that my answer is this one right here. 6n plus 5 equals 77. Number 3, you want to buy a pet rabbit that costs $57. You already have $15, and you plan to save $9 per week. If W represents the number of weeks until you have enough money, what equation could you use to find the value of W? Okay, so some important information this time around. We know that the rabbit is going to cost $57. You already have $15, and you plan to save $9 per week. We're also told that W represents the number of weeks. Okay, now we've talked about phrases like this. $9 per week, that word like per, each, every, that almost always means that I'm going to take the number near that word and multiply it with my variable. And W does indeed represent the number of weeks, so it makes sense to do that here. So I know that I need 9W in my answer. So anything that doesn't have 9W, I can eliminate. So A doesn't have 9W, B does, C does, D does not, E does not. So I'm eliminating A, D, and E. Okay, and I'm going to mark them out with my pen so I can see that A, D, and E did not have a 9W. So I knew that that could not be my answer. Now, you already have the $15 that's needed to buy the rabbit. So you need to include that in how much money you're saving up, right? So since you're including it, you want to add it to your total cost. So that means that our answer has to be this one right here. 9W plus 15 equals 57. Okay, last one. Mike buys 4 equally priced DVDs online. Each DVD costs the same amount with a $5.98 shipping charge included. The total cost came to $79.94. Write an equation you could use to find the cost of each DVD. Okay, so important information. We know that you're buying 4 DVDs that all cost the same amount. Okay, you also have to pay $5.98 for shipping, and the total cost is $79.94. Now, when we think about this equation, would it make sense to say that the DVDs plus shipping equals the total cost? So think about that for a minute. The DVDs that you're buying plus the flat shipping rate equals the total cost. Yeah, that makes sense. So it does not tell us what variable to use, but let's maybe use D for DVDs. So could I say 4D because you're buying 4 of those DVDs and they all cost the same amount? Yeah, I could. Plus, you pay that flat shipping rate of $5.98, and altogether that's going to equal the total cost of $79.94. So 4D plus $5.98 equals $79.94. That is the end of this little mini lesson. Have a good day.